Hereby call this meeting to order. The time is 5:31 p.m. Notice of the meeting, we have the presence of a quorum. Notice of the meeting has been posted for the time and manner required by law. We are here this evening for a hearing on the proposed 2016 proposed tax rates. And I will turn it over to you, Dr. Dupree.
Yes, ma'am. As you know, Board, we're at a place where the Board will take action soon to approve tax rates for the next school year. And we've been talking about our budget. So the rates are designed to support the budget. And Stephen Bassett, our CFO, is prepared to kind of do the hearing this evening. So I'll turn it over to Steve.
Okay. Thank you, sir, Ms. Tassan, and the rest of the Board. This is the last step of our budget process for 16-17, the actual approval of the tax rates. And so we will get into this presentation. As Dr. Dupree mentioned, the purpose of the tax rate is to support the budgets that have been adopted. And so the budget for the general fund is $592.6 million. The budget for the debt service fund is $96.5 million. So the tax rate supports that. So looking at our tax rate history, just to reacquaint you with things, we have not had a change in the tax rate since 09-10 is the last time we had a different tax rate, and that's when we had 27 pennies in the debt service rate. It went up to 30 pennies in the 10-11 year. We have not had a change in the tax rate since that time. Okay. Looking at how our rate compares with other districts, you can see that we're at the $1.34 total. It's very favorable in comparison to most of the other districts around us. Aldine, as you can see, has a much higher M&O rate. Aldine and A-Leaf, they have a higher M&O rate. Their INS tax rate is a lot less than us. They're not growing. They're pretty much standing still from an enrollment perspective, and they don't have a very active bond program. Conroe is less. Houston ISD, obviously, they're the ones that have the biggest amount in terms of dollar per penny because of their industry. But there's other comparisons. There's other comparisons on that I'll show you with the other districts here in a bit. Okay, so our property value is really what's behind the tax rates, and so you can see how our property value has increased over time. You can see the dip. What I think is a better indicator of our property value growth is the year-over-year changes. And so you can see that we're getting back to the years back in the mid-2000s before the economic last depression that we had or major recession that we had from a national perspective. We had a lot of high growth year over year in the early 2000s. So it looks like we're getting back to averaging in that 10% change. So we'll have to see if that continues. But you can see how this is compared over time. So just as a reminder, almost 80% of our property value is made up of residential. Okay, so we are definitely a bedroom community, and we don't have the industrial tax base that a Houston ISD would have. When you look on the impact of the property value increase on the tax rate, so we're staying with the $1.34 tax rate. You can see that that's there in the middle, the total rate of $1.34. The average home value, the average market value of the residence has gone up 6.7 or 6.56%. The taxable value has gone up to $240, almost $241. Okay. And so you can see that increase is almost 9.7%. And so that pretty much just translates with the same tax rate that we have. That's the percentage change for the average homeowner in the district, a monthly increase in taxes of $23.39. And this is what was published in our notice for this meeting. So some other ways to look at our numbers, and so this is new for you. What we're doing here is we're looking at our general fund revenue per student adjusted for inflation for the past 10 years, okay? And so you could see that the actual dollars is what's represented in the bar, and you can see how that's gone up. But we actually have a decrease in our revenue per student, as we've talked about, because of the state values. But what's interesting, though, is when you have 07, 08 as the base year from an inflation perspective, when you take inflation over the 10 years' time, and then you look at the compound annual growth rate, if you're factoring in inflation, our revenue per student has only changed in the past 10 years on an annual basis of 0.76%. Okay, so we've had very modest revenue growth over the past 10 years. Okay, you can do the same kind of calculation on the expenditure side, and so the expenditures, we do have this. This is a bit of an anomaly in 09-10. These are all numbers pretty much straight out of the CAFR, but this row here, we had the fiscal year change, and so that had less in terms of the spending per student, just from the CAFR perspective. But when you look at the compound annual growth rate, to determine how that's calculated, it really is only comparing this number to the last number. Okay, so the fact that we had this anomaly, that doesn't really change that overall calculation of 0.9%. And so our expenditure change, when you adjust it for inflation, has been very modest over the past 10 years. So looking at some other benchmarking information, so this was something that we dug up that was new, but I thought it was very, very interesting and certainly worth including in this presentation, especially because it's a public presentation. But when you look at our expenditures per student for all funds, we're talking all funds, federal funds, child nutrition, capital improvement, debt service, general fund. When you include all of those, you can see how our spending per student compares to the other districts, and we are low. So if you see all that, what we did is we went ahead and broke down that in the next slide. I wanted to show you both versions of this when you break it out for those four major categories. So the biggest category on the bottom is the general fund revenue, the general fund expenses per student, and we are we're higher than some. We're pretty much in the middle on that. But when you look at some of the others, debt service, we're significantly less debt service per student in comparison to the other districts, and then also the capital funds are in green. We're a lot less than some of the other high growth districts, and then the special revenue, we're also low in comparison to some of the other districts. So Aldine and Ailey, for example, one of the ones that had a lower tax rate than us, lower overall, their spending per student is higher than us, mainly because of the title funds that they get, because they have much higher free and reduced percentages. What's interesting is that one of the others that was less than us from a tax perspective was Conroe, but you can see they have they are lower on the general fund side, but they are spending a lot on a per student side from a debt perspective, and their overall spending per student is higher than us. The amount on the capital side and then the special revenue side is pretty similar. Really, the major difference between us and Conroe on this chart is the debt per student. Okay, so this is just kind of a unique, a different way of looking at things. But in comparison, when you think all funds, cash going out the door, it is interesting that we're lower than pretty much all of our local peers here. Okay. So again, just to touch on where we're at from a debt perspective, I think we're very pleased with how our debt is structured right now. I think that the important takeaway from here is that within 20 years, we're going to have 97.5%, mature within 20 years. We have a lot of flexibility with our debt, especially in the out years. We're very well positioned, and we still have $447 million from the last two bond authorizations of authorized but unissued debt. And again, we'll be talking about the commercial paper program later if you have any questions, but that'll be part of our strategy to keep that our overall debt costs as low as possible and paying as little as we can from a debt perspective. Our biggest driver from a cost perspective, of course, is our enrollment growth. And so you can see our history looking at, and again, this is a 10-year view, but we shaved off some of the history so we can include some of the projections. So we have 4 years of not counting this year, which is pretty much there. We're almost at the 47,000 kids. If you go out to 2021 will be over 78,000. So that would be a 14% increase over that period of time. And you can see the major school additions that we have planned. What we could do next time you see this slide in 1920, we'll be looking at probably another elementary school, and then I think we're also going to try to get elementary 51 in on this year. And so the growth in our schools and the enrollment, that's really the story behind our expenses. So we've talked about our strategies, and so really our strategies from a debt perspective are really going to depend on what happens over the next several months. And so we've talked about this in the legislature convening in 2017, this coming January. That'll be the 85th legislative session. Just to be blunt, the initial outlook from a revenue perspective is not encouraging. However, because there has been such large property value growth throughout the state, if somehow the school district community was able to have that property growth stay within the school budgets throughout the state, then it would be a very good story. That's really going to be the tug of war, because we've had billions of dollars in property value growth statewide. But again, the way that the formulas work, the state is really the beneficiary of that, and they can allocate those funds to other needs by allocating less to the school districts. We are working, the resource allocation teams are working on, again, how to continue to become more efficient as a school district. We'll have to see how local value growth, if that continues, if we stay in the 10% range, like we've had, are we really back to that pattern from the mid to early 2000s in terms of always been, over 10%. So we'll have to see what happens with that. I mentioned the overhead that comes along with the 3 new campuses, but we are going to have significant challenges for our budget in 17-18 because right now our initial numbers show a significant deficit, and that's without salary increases. And we know we're going to have a significant pressure for salary increases for the next year. So we try to keep this short and sweet. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to entertain them.
Thank you, Mr. Bassett. We appreciate it. Mr. Rice.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Bassett. I would like to just go back for a moment to slide 3, and you were showing the tax rate history. And is my understanding correct that prior to the 05-06 year, the tax rate of every school district in the state was $1.50 per $100 of valuation, or pretty much? And then Governor Perry compressed that tax rate from $1.50 to $1.04 in 2 steps, which is why we see the $1.33, and then it went to $1.04.
Yes, sir. At most districts, not all districts. There were some districts, actually even some in Region 4, that had a higher M&O rate of more than $1.50. Mm-hmm. They had, I don't know exactly how that happened, but some of them did have a higher rate. But there were some more property wealthy districts in some other parts of the state, especially the ones that had benefited from energy and such, that they were not at the $1.50 yet. But the vast majority of districts, all the large ones, all the major players, were at $1.50. You're correct.
But would it be fair to say that most of our peer districts and most of the districts in Region 4 were at $1.50 per $100 evaluation?
Yes, sir.
And am I correct in understanding that then Governor Perry created a business franchise tax to make up the difference, which time has shown it never succeeded in making up that full yield? And am I to understand also that Lieutenant Governor Patrick has rescinded the bulk of that business franchise tax in the last legislative session, and then in the upcoming legislative session is slated to go away entirely?
Yes, sir. Okay. I think that's the plan.
Okay. So and then I wanted to also look at page 6. And I notice on here that in 2010, so we had a net decline of 2.5% in the CAD appraisal value. We're at $35 billion today. It was less than that. Mm-hmm. And that was coming hard on the heels of fast growth in Fort Bend ISD. And so that hit us at a time when it hurts the most. In other words, when the CAD appraisal value increases significantly, 10% last year, which we banked some of that money for this year, which is why we don't have a
Right.
deficit this year, we get the benefit of that increase for 12 months.
Mhm.
And then the state recognizes that delta, if you will, and they reduce the contribution they make by a corresponding amount. And so if we were to have the CAD value of the appraisal district decrease or falter, reduce, then not only would the revenue we enjoy from what we get from the CAD appraisal value go down, but also the contribution from the state would go down at the same time. And that really, really hits us when it hurts, especially if we've just opened 3 new elementary schools and hired 50 teachers each and a principal and custodians and all that kind of stuff. So that really hurts us, right?
Yes, sir.
Which, and also, is it my understanding that our Comptroller Glenn Hagar has given us a 5-star rating based on the amount of revenue that we receive and the academic achievement of our students?
Yes, sir. We have a 5-star rating in that.
How many districts in the state
I don't
receive
know
that
the
rating?
number. It's not very many. It's just
Not
a handful.
very many, and we're one of those. So, and then on page 11, if we could look at that, out of all these districts, we've got the lowest expenditures per student of all those districts up there on page 11. So I'd say we're doing a pretty darn good job of being good stewards of our taxpayers' money. That's what it appears to me. And why, even though we're fortunate, we know we live in Fort Bend County, and sometimes I hear people say, well, the county's growing, and I think when my wife and I moved here, there were 289,000 people. Now there's over 700,000 people in Fort Bend County, and it's going to hit 1 million. So we're going to have growth for the next several years. But with a school funding formula that's based the way it is, and someone says, why don't you lower your tax rate? Well, we can't lower our tax rate. We see we're going to have a $9 million deficit next year. And so we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with that. And we've got 10,000 employees. Half of those are teachers. So if we want to attract the best and brightest teachers and provide professional development for those teachers and encourage and motivate those teachers and recognize them for the contributions they're making in educating our children, we have to pay them for that. That happens in every other industry in America. People that perform well are rewarded. We can't do that if we lower our tax rate. That's what it seems like to me. So we had the CAD appraisal value increased. I think you based the budget last year on 10%, maybe 9%. You were very conservative, and it increased more than that. And so we created our own economic stabilization fund, which is why we were able to give raises this year, and we didn't spend all the money. But next year it's going to catch up with us. And then one last thing I want to ask, if I'm correct in my understanding, if we assume for the moment that our local CAD appraisal values continue to increase every single year and never went down, we know that won't happen, but if it did, wouldn't we reach a point where the state wasn't contributing one single penny to the operation of this district?
Yes, sir. We would eventually reach
Okay.
that.
Okay, well, thank you for a very informative presentation. I appreciate it, and I would just like to also thank you, Dr. Dupree, for running a very tight ship when it comes to our financial resources and being good stewards. And it's not just me saying that, it's the comptroller of the state of Texas, has one of the biggest budgets of any state in the nation, giving us a 5-star rating. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rice, for summing that up so succinctly for us. Appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? Ms. Helliger.
Thank you, Mr. Rice, also for the summary, and Mr. Bassett for the information. I mean, the one this is great information. The one slide that I'm stuck on is slide 11, which you have already up on the screen, is that we're basically getting the most, doing the most with the least in this graph. We're getting the biggest bang for our buck in the sense that we're receiving 5-star accommodations, and we're the lowest based on this graph. And I know a lot of our taxpayers, like Mr. Rice stated, have come up to me as well and said, we need to lower our tax rate. We need to lower this. But what kind of impact? If there's, number one, they're saying we're not doing enough. That's what people tend to say, right? But what would it impact our students if we were to lower this tax rate and lower this revenue? I think people don't understand, what kind of impact that's going to have directly on our children as well as the staff members. If we've got 5, 6 new schools that are coming up, how would this, in general, how would that impact us? I mean, I think people need to hear that.
Well, if we actually lower the M&O rate, I mean, we would lose a significant amount of revenue on a per penny basis, over $3 million per penny, and so that would just pretty much be coming directly out of our fund balance, and we wouldn't be able to have any financial flexibility. We really need some in the coming years, as you mentioned. On the debt service side, a reduction in the future is something that I'm advocating for in the future as part of a potential swap. If we did just reduce that, we would lose that flexibility that we'd have. We would be paying off less debt early. We wouldn't have as much flexibility on the debt side. But when you look at that next one in terms of how much we're the red, so concentrating on the red parts of the bar, that's how much we're spending on a per student basis from a debt perspective. Mm-hmm. And we're really working hard to manage that number. If we did lower the rate, there would be an additional interest expense of what was that amount? I remember was it $3 million? I think it was $3.1 million over the life of the bonds. And so we definitely want to save that interest expense by keeping the rate where we're at and not having to pay that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Helliger. Mr. Burdine.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I appreciate the presentation, and I appreciate your stewardness as well. In the years past, you've had a comparison from like Northside ISD, I believe, and San Antonio Independent School District. Do these numbers compare? Are they similar in all the other parts of Texas, or?
No, they are. I mean, for purposes of this, we did just include the Houston area from a tax perspective, but we can run this with our state peers really quickly, and we'd be happy to send something out on that. But knowing what I know about the North Side and Northeast and some of those other districts, it's going to be pretty favorable. They have significant debt programs. And I'm pretty sure their debt spending per student is going to be more along the lines of a Sci-Fair, which is one of the bigger numbers on the screen behind me.
So it'd be safe to say that comparing large districts in the whole state of Texas, we're extremely competitive.
Very much so. Certainly from a spending per student basis, sure.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. Mr. George.
Yes. It's a wonderful presentation, and especially I have a couple of questions. I'm trying to understand what it is.
Sure.
Page number 12.
Okay.
We talk about general fund debt services. I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Capital project funds. What is that?
That's what folks are actually spending their bond monies on. Okay, so it's cash out the door for bond monies being spent.
Okay.
And so that's new buildings. It could be technology. It could be buses. It could be, it's all kinds of things that are eligible for capital spending. And so one of the things that, that we're going to have to keep an eye on that'll be interesting is how much capital spending for some of the ones that do have, again, the green numbers, the green bars, how much technology is being spent on that in some of the others. Because, again, I think that's where some districts are kind of sheltering their general fund by using some more bond monies for other things that may have been spent using general fund monies in the past.
Sure.
And so, but this is a way to kind of capture that from a total spending perspective.
What about special revenue?
Well, the special revenue, the biggest driver of that, now child nutrition is in that number, but the biggest, but that's going to be more on a per student basis, and but the you're not going to see massive variations in that. The biggest reasons for variations on the special revenue is your higher free and reduced percentage districts are going to be having more spending there because of the title funds that they get. That's the biggest driver of the differences there.
And I'm just, I don't know if you remember, last time you mentioned if we keep that 2 penny, we would be able to maybe utilize for either tax refund or lowering the rate, or if we keep it, you said we would be able to pay off our debts. What was that number?
We'll be paying off $7 million more in debt
each year, or
this coming year.
Okay.
Oh, then we'll see what happens with what we decide to do with the rate next year.
Okay.
But because we'd be paying off that $7 million early over the life of those bonds, we'd be saving just over $3 million in our interest expenses.
Right. And we had discussion from my fellow trustee members. We are talking about I'm looking at these, especially this page number 12, and I'm very excited to see that we are spending almost up to the par with the other district when it comes to general fund.
Mm-hmm.
But still we have a much lower per student total expense. And especially it excites me to see that our debt services is much lower than so many districts. Of course, when we get into debt, we have to pay back, we have to service it, and things of that nature. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that how we communicate this with our community, because just now Ms. Haliger said, people always ask, well, why don't you just give us some more tax break? And how do we communicate? Because people need to know this, in my opinion, and we have to find a way to let people know, at least it put out there. So we are one of the lowest. We spend more money on our children, but still we are not at the high end. And some of these numbers are really high. I mean, if you really look at the taxes. So how do we communicate that with the public?
Well, I mean, we certainly have our work cut out for us, especially if we are thinking about doing a tax ratification election. We will need to be communicating to the max, as we say. By that time, though, we should have these numbers updated for 15-16. Okay, so I'm anticipating will look pretty similar for 15-16, except what you'll see is our green section will be bigger. Okay, I mean, our capital spending per student is more 15-16. Okay, so but it's not going to make up the differences throughout. But the debt one will look pretty similar, and the special revenue will look pretty similar, and same on the general fund.
That's because we are building schools, and,
right?
Other stuff.
Right, but it's not going to overcome some of these differences. I mean, some of these differences. I mean, Katie's spending almost $7,000 more per student than we are.
Sure. I'm very excited to see, along with my fellow trustee members, and good information. And I honestly think we should communicate this with the public more. How good we are doing with our money. I mean, like Mr. Rice mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. George. Mrs. James.
Thank you, Mrs. Talsan. I'd like to echo the comments of Mr. Rice, and thank you, Mr. Bassett and Dr. Dupree, and all the staff for our efficiency in operations and our financial stewardship. I think this presentation shows that very clearly, and I appreciate all that effort, and I appreciate you explaining that to us and to the public. I have a question on this slide. When I look at the districts that have the same M&O tax rate as ours, which is the general fund in the dark color there at the bottom, there seems to be a variation in the amount of revenue per student. Is that based entirely on the property values of the property in that school, those individual districts? Or is there another reason for the variation?
It's really driven by the state funding formulas. Okay, I mean, what we're collecting and what they're collecting, you know, everybody's different, and so just to give you a brief history lesson, back in 2006, whenever the tax rate compression happened, that Mr. Rice had mentioned before, everybody was on target revenue, so everybody had a set amount. Over time, we did see everybody pretty much go back on formula where the numbers that they were spending were being driven by what they were collecting, but then also the growth in their CPTD values. You're going to see variations in this on a year-over-year basis because of the year-over-year changes for everybody, and those are very different from district to district to district, and so it's we could certainly put this together, over time, and which would be interesting to see, but it might be just too much data.
I'm not so much interested in that, but I'm interested in pointing out that there isn't necessarily equity on a statewide basis from district to district about the amount of revenue that's received relative to the amount that we're taxing.
Oh, that's for sure.
Yeah. So that's kind of my point, because every child needs the opportunity for education, and it needs to be an equitable opportunity. And this is just an example of pointing out how even if our tax rate is the same, the funds that we receive isn't necessarily the same across this region, and I'm sure that those numbers play out statewide as well. So
no, definitely, and that's I appreciate you bringing that up, because that was probably the most disappointing aspect of the lawsuit outcome, is the fact that there really wasn't anything mentioned about equity, and that was one of the major points that we had.
Thank you, Mr. Bassett.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Thank you, Mr. Bassett. Dr. Dupree, we will take about 5 minutes, and then we will, do we have public comment? Anybody signed up?
No one signed up.
Thank you. So we'll open it up if anybody wants to speak. Is there anybody present that wants to say anything about what was just presented? Yes, ma'am. Can you come to this microphone right here?
Hi, my name is Sarah Parr, and I live in Sweetwater. And I have more of a question than a comment. And I'm very interested in the part of the discussion where we talked about what you all receive in tax from the appraisal district versus what the state contributes. And when that money fluctuates, the state either contributes more or they contribute less. So and I don't really know all of the ins and outs of that, but my question is, if our tax rate keeps going up, does that mean that the state continues to contribute less and less? And if that's the case, if you did drop the tax rate, would the state contribute more? I'm just asking the question.
Mr. Bassett, do you mind?
No, I don't mind. I mean, so the tax rate hasn't gone up and up. I mean, since 10-11, we haven't changed the rate. It's the property values, I think, is what you meant to say, in terms of our property values going up and up.
Well, it's not just the property values that have continued to go up, but it's also the number of homes that has escalated too. I mean, Fort Bend County has been nationally known for its growth over the last several years. And so I heard you talk about the appraised values of the homes going up, but I didn't really hear you talk so much about the amount of homes that has gone up over this same period of time.
Right. No, so we have definitely had significant value growth, and as shown, the percentages, from this chart. And so what happens, though, one of the charts that really is missing from this that we've shown the board in the past is that state share. We had that in the last presentation where we showed the state share. I guess over the past 10 years have pretty much gone from the state making up 50% of our funding. Now in this year, it's closer to 36%. And so that difference between that 50% and the 36% is really being made up by the collections from our local taxpayers. And so if we lowered our rate, though, the way the formulas work, if we lowered our M&O rate, the state would actually send us less money. We're incentivized by the state to stay at $1.04, okay, which is one of the strange things about the state funding formulas.
And if you have additional questions, I'm sure Mr. Bassett would be glad to speak to you after we adjourn. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your question. Do we have any other questions from the public? Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And we are adjourned. We will be reconvene in 5 minutes.